Hello, this is Craig Zaleski,
Emilio Espada.
Jacob Maz.
and we bring you the pros and cons of Windows 7, Windows 8, and Linux Mint 13. There are 3 different versions of Windows 7, each with their own capabilities. Windows 7 Home Premium costs $120, Windows 7 Professional costs $200, and Windows 7 Ultimate costs $220. If you buy Windows 8 before January 31st, 2013, it'll only cost you $70. After January 1st, the price will raise to $200. Linux Mint is a free operating system in the sense that the only cost to get it on your computer is the cost of a USB or a CD to boot it. The minimum hardware requirements for Windows 7 are a 1 GHz 32 or 64-bit processor, a 1 GB RAM with a 32-bit processor or 2 GB RAM with a 64-bit, 16 GB hard disk space for a 32-bit or 20 GB space for a 64-bit, and DirectX 9 graphics device with WDDM1 driver. The minimum hardware requirements for Windows 8 are a 1 GHz 32 or 64-bit processor, 1 GB RAM with a 32-bit processor or 2 GB RAM with a 64-bit, 16 GB hard disk space for 32-bit and 64-bit, and a DirectX 9 graphics device with WDDM1 driver. The minimum hardware requirements for Linux Mint 13 are a 32-bit processor, 512 megabytes of RAM, 5 gigabytes of disk space, a graphics card that can have a 800 by 600 resolution, and a CD/DVD drive or a USB port to install Linux. Windows is able to run .exe or executable files. Linux cannot. Instead, Linux uses ELF files. Most computers come with Windows 7 already installed. You can also go and buy a Windows 7 installed disk. Windows 8 installs from a disk, or if you're using a customer preview, you can install from a bootable USB. You can find Linux Mint 13 online and get it on a CD or a bootable USB. Windows 7 is quite simple. Everything is mainly a click or a double click away. It can be used for video editing, photo editing, creating videos, and much more with many programs that can run. And you could also open up the Start menu and search for programs, files, and everything else. Here's an example of Windows 7's ability for you to search for programs. Windows 8 is similar to 7, but can be a bit more complicated. It also has a search feature, so you could search for programs or files. Here's an example of Windows 8's ability for you to search for programs. Linux Mint 13 can be a bit more confusing and isn't necessarily as simple as Windows 7 or Windows 8. Here's an example of Linux Mint 13's ability for you to search for programs. Microsoft provides its own security for Windows computers, Microsoft Security Essentials. Windows 8 comes pre-installed with Microsoft Security Essentials. Linux is generally more secure than Windows because the majority of people are making more viruses for Windows than they are for Linux, but it is still a good idea to have an antivirus, such as Kaspersky antivirus. Windows 7's interface is very similar to the previous Windows interfaces. It has a new feature though that allows you to snap windows together to allow easy multitasking. Windows 8 has a new interface called the Metro UI interface. It looks like it was designed for a touchpad or a touch phone. The interface is made of different blocks that represent apps and files. You can move these around and reorganize them to your preference. Linux Mint gives you 2 choices, Mate and Cinnamon. Mate has a Windows feel to it, so if you are more used to Windows, this might be a better choice. But both interfaces are unique and they're very similar. Windows 7 comes with numerous features, such as window snapping, which allows you to multitask very easily. Here I'm showing you how you can optimize Windows 7 startup time by increasing the number of processors that Windows 7 uses when it starts up. You can also do the same thing for Windows 8. Windows 8 comes with a whole bunch of new features. It allows you to connect your Windows Live account to your computer, allowing you to access your Xbox, your music, your mail. You can also search for programs, files, and settings very easily by just typing in any keywords on the Metro UI. Linux Mint 13 comes with Grub, which is a boot menu that comes up every time you turn your computer on that allows you to select multiple operating systems. Also, Linux is an open source operating system, which means that a lot of third-party people are able to make their own additions and versions and updates for it. Windows 7 had an average startup time of 25.5 seconds, an average wake-up from sleep time of 6 seconds, and an average shutdown time of 10.5 seconds. Windows 8 had an average startup time of 23 seconds, an average wake-up from sleep time of 4 seconds, and an average shutdown time of 2.5 seconds. Linux Mint 13 had an average startup time of 12 seconds, an average wake-up from sleep time of 6 seconds, and an average shutdown time of 5.5 seconds.
On PC Mark 7, Windows 7 obtained a score of 2051. Windows 8 obtained a score of 2356. This concludes the comparison between Windows 7, Windows 8, and Linux Mint 13.